the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday, June 24th. A extra show. Wasn't expecting to do a show. We've got, actually, in 2 hours, we've got the Ask Me Anything show, and some of you will be on video for the the supporters to ask me questions, and we're still going ahead with the AMA show. So at 3 p.m. East Coast time, there will be an AMA show. But given the news out of Russia, and given that I'm doing these shows on the news, it seemed appropriate to add an additional show and to and to talk about the breaking news out of Russia that I've been following since yesterday afternoon. A lot to talk about. There's a lot happening, but we have to talk first about all the caveats. All the caveats, right? Fog of war. We don't really know what's going on back there. There are, as far as I can tell, there are no real, objective journalists covering this. The mainstream media and the alternative to the mainstream media, the media generally, is sleeping. This is happening in places where they don't necessarily have a presence. The story is moving super fast. This breaking story is really evidence to the fact that to follow breaking stories, forget about CNN, forget about Fox, forget about your conventional media. Twitter is the place to follow it. Now, it's dangerous because Twitter is filled with nonsense and filled with misrepresentations and filled with made-up stuff, but it is far ahead, and if you can screen out stuff and you can evaluate on the fly, you can get the information, much more information out of Twitter than anywhere else. Of course, the ultimate source of what's going on right now is Telegram. Telegram is where all the Russians are actually posting, a lot of the Russian civilians, a lot of the Russian military, a lot of the Russian propagandists, a lot of videos out on Telegram. Many of those are being translated into English and put up on Twitter. So I'm getting a lot of those through those mechanisms onto Twitter. But again, not every video is real. Not every video actually is of this particular crisis. It's hard to verify. It's hard to validate. So beware, and that includes what I say here today. I might regret saying certain things. A few days from now, it is really hard to tell what is actually going on in Russia right now. There's certain things that are factual. There's certain things that we know. We know Putin gave a speech today, and we can, I think, interpret and read a lot into that speech. We know that Prigozhin has been talking for months, particularly in the last few days, and in particular since this whole thing started yesterday. So we've got a lot of videotape and audio of Prigozhin. We know certain things about where Prigozhin's Wagner military is. We know that because there's clear video showing it in Rostov, and we know it because video of the convoy of his military heading towards Moscow. You can see the video and the testimonies. Now, theoretically, even that could be fake. Unlikely. We also are seeing explosions. We're seeing helicopters being downed. We're seeing airplanes. The whole thing is, again, hard to tell what's exactly going on, because part of my disbelief, part of the difficulty in believing what's happening here is, where is the Russian Air Force? Now, you could ask that question about the entire war in Ukraine. Where is the Russian Air Force? But God, there is a convoy here on a highway heading in one direction. You'd think this is just a shooting range. This should be easy for the Russian Air Force to just wipe them out, and yet nothing. And if anything, the stories coming out of Russian airplanes being downed. But is the Russian Air Force refusing orders and sitting back? Are they refusing to fly? Is the Russian Air Force in on this? Some people are claiming Putin is in on this. Okay, so let's step back a second. What is actually going on? What do we know? We know that for a couple of months now, a few months now, Prigozhin has been complaining about the Ministry of Defense, claiming that they have abandoned his Wagner troops. They have been doing the bulk of the fighting in Bakhmut. They're the ones who took Bakhmut from the Ukrainians after 7 months of fighting. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Wagner soldiers have been killed during those battles, tens of thousands probably. We know that the Wagner group has recruited, many of its recruits who fought in Bakhmut are criminals who were let out of jail specifically to enlist with Wagner in order to fight on the front. And then we know that Prigozhin has been super critical of the Ministry of Defense not providing his troops with ammunition. One thing to consider is that he was lying much of that time, and indeed some of the ammunition that he was receiving from the Minister of Defense he was saving up for what's happening right now. What's happening right now, I think, given what we're hearing, what's happening right now, I think, has been planned for weeks. This is well orchestrated. Everybody's doing exactly what Prigozhin wants them to do. They set this out. It all happened kind of on schedule. Okay, that was a side. And then he started complaining and really calling the Ministry of Defense and the leading generals in the Russian army, calling them treasonous and basically sending Russian troops unequipped into the meat grinder. He claimed after the Ukrainian counteroffensive started, that the Ukrainians were making significant progress, much more progress than even the Ukrainians were claiming. So he thinks they're breaking through and they're having a real impact and causing the Russians real casualties. And really, he was borderline treasonous in what he was saying in terms of the regime, in terms of the motivation, in terms of what they were doing. Then, I think it was early yesterday, video came out where he was basically said, look, everything you've been told about the causes of this war, why this war was started, is all wrong. This war was not started because of NATO. This war was not started in order to denazify or demilitarize Ukraine. He says this war was started so the oligarchs and the people in charge at the Kremlin could loot Ukraine, could steal their stuff. And they were all just criminals. And this video is out now. Granted, you have to rely on translations. It might not be 100% accurate, but I've seen multiple translations translating it the same way. He basically called that the Kremlin. Now, he never mentions Putin. He mentions the Minister of Defense. He mentions other of the oligarchs and the leaders. He has criticized the oligarchs and their children, particularly the children, for not fighting in the war. I mentioned this on one of my shows. So he has basically been agitating to the point where I have been wondering, why the hell is Putin keeping him around? How is this guy still alive? Well, he's alive because he's surrounded by his own military personnel who he trusts, who is trained, who he pays in cash, it turns out. Another aside, this morning or late last night, the Wagner offices in St. Petersburg were raided by Russian police, raided once it was clear what Prigozhin was up to, and what they found were truckloads of cash, rubles. Prigozhin today said, "Yeah, of course, I pay my people in cash. That's all the cash that was meant to pay my people. I pay my people, not like you Russian military guys." So he's been speaking out. I thought that what was going on was probably this is Putin hedging his bets. If the military personnel fail, he goes with Prigozhin, and he sides with Prigozhin. So I thought that was what was going on, but it still seemed very strange because he was going all out, and really at the end, all his critique is questioning Putin's judgment because Putin is these people's boss. Anyway, yesterday, Prigozhin basically announced, after this release of this videos, where he's saying the reason the war was started was for looting, that the Ministry of Defense had no clue what they were doing, that the Ukrainians were making a lot more progress, that they were sending Russian troops to die for no reason, and they were just being slaughtered for no reason, just I guess the ego of the generals and the people in charge. Once that video was released, it was clear that, okay, he probably crossed the line. And, so he preemptively came up with another video saying that its troops have just been shelled by the Russian military, that they had been shelled and they were under attack by the Russian military. By the way, he has claimed this before. When they left Bakhmut, he claimed that Russian troops were firing on his own troops. My guess is that most of that was just friendly fire, accidental, but he claimed it was intentional. He also kidnapped a Russian officer, supposedly tortured him, and got him to say all kinds of stuff on tape, accusing the generals and everybody else of all kinds of nasty stuff. So again, this has been going on for a while. Anyway, yesterday, he declared that he was heading to Moscow to rid Russia of the corruption. Basically, the Minister of Defense and the leading generals commanding the Russian military. And he had been stationed in Donetsk, in a part of Ukraine that had been occupied by the Russians since 2014. This is after his troops had left Bakhmut, and he's now in Donetsk. Basically, last night, his troops started moving out of Donetsk, heading towards Rostov. At least one column of them headed towards Rostov. Now, what is Rostov? Rostov is a city in Russia. It is a city close to Donetsk, close to Ukraine, and it has served since the beginning of this war as the military command for all Ukrainian operations. So this is where the general in charge of the entire Ukraine operation sits. This is where his officers are. This is where the the number 2 in the Ministry of Defense sits. Again, supervising everything that is happening in Ukraine. Early this morning, while it was still dark, it became clear that Prigozhin's forces, Wagner forces, basically had entered Rostov and had surrounded the officers of the Ministry of Defense there. They had come in with basically no opposition, maybe minor clashes, but basically nobody tried to stop them, not at the border and not in Rostov itself. This morning I saw video, which is unless a deep fake, which I doubt it, of Prigozhin speaking with outside, sitting there, speaking in a very tough manner with the general in charge of all Ukrainian operations and the vice minister of defense, accusing them of all kinds of stuff, and basically putting them in their place, and telling them he's going to Moscow and he's going to take out the Ministry of Defense, the thing. In addition, another column of Wagner troops headed probably, I don't know where the source is, but my guess is also from the same area in eastern Ukraine, started heading north towards Moscow, on the highway towards Moscow. Now, Russia's a big place. Western Russia, not as big as a place as Eastern Russia, still a big place. So they are driving towards Moscow. This is a column of several hundred supposedly vehicles. Again, hard to tell exactly how many vehicles are involved, how many troops are involved. But they're heading north. From what we can tell, facing almost no opposition on the way. From what we can tell, the opposition they got from helicopters and airplanes, they have dealt with, and helicopters and planes have been downed. From what we can tell, again, all with a caveat because it's hard to tell. From what we can tell, a big oil depot in a major city on the way north was blown up. Not clear if by Prigozhin's forces or by Russians themselves. Also unclear, but there are stories out saying that many Russian soldiers stationed around Rostov and then stationed on the way to Moscow are flipping to Wagner. Again, hard to verify, hard to confirm, but at least looks like it. Latest reports are that Prigozhin's troops are, I don't know, depending on when this actually happened, are basically an hour from Moscow, maybe 2 hours from Moscow. Now, part of that depends on what kind of barriers they face. Can they cross the rivers? Have bridges been blown up? Clearly, Moscow is in a state of emergency. The police are frantic. There are military barricades. There are roadblocks. There have been roadblocks along the whole highway leading to Moscow. Wagner troops have just blown right through those roadblocks. So anyway, this is a big dramatic situation we are seeing on the way to Moscow. As the troops approach Moscow, we'll know much more later this afternoon, as there's a certain probability that Prigozhin's troops will actually enter Moscow and whether they'll actually be fighting. From all indications, and I'm going to get to Putin's speech in a minute, which was really, I think, really interesting in terms of his speech. But by all indications, Putin has left Moscow, possibly to St. Petersburg, possibly to his hideout in the mountains. By all indications, Medvedev, the number 2 in Russia, has left Moscow, not clear, with his entire family, not clear where. Many of the oligarchs, their private jets were seen leaving Moscow airport last night, heading towards Turkey, Israel, Dubai, basically anywhere getting out of Moscow. Of course, not going to the West where they were all wanted or they were all under sanctions. So the rats are fleeing a sinking ship. Not clear where the Russian army is. Now, much of the Russian army, of course, is in Ukraine. But where is the rest of the Russian army? Where's the rest of the Russian command? Yesterday, videos came out of at least 2 Russian generals calling Prigozhin to stand down, calling him a traitor, and asking the Wagner troops to lay down their weapons and surrender. Okay, but where are they actually threatening military action? Where are the generals rounding up the troops? Where's the FSB, the equivalent of the KGB? Everybody out there that I've read, all the Russian experts of all kinds of varieties, are convinced Prigozhin is going to be defeated here, that he is going to soon face the might of the Russian military and the might of the Russian Air Force. Where is it? Now, it could be that they're right. It could be that this will lead to that they're still getting organized and ultimately that is what happened. But, very, very difficult to see what they're waiting for now before the troops enter Moscow is the ideal time to go and destroy this column of troops. Now, the column has anti-aircraft weapons, but still, you would think the Russians know how to deal with their own anti-aircraft weapons systems. You'd think they'd know how to jam them. You'd think they know how to fix them. Anyway, it's a real mystery where the Air Force is. It's a real mystery where the rest of the Russian army is, and what is exactly happening. All right, let's talk a little bit about. Again, a lot of different angles here. We'll talk about the response of the Putin-loving American right to this in a minute, but let's talk about Putin's speech this morning. It was a really unique speech. It was it definitely had the aura of Putin panicking, of Putin losing a sense of control. His speeches are usually longer, more forceful, and this one was not. This one was defeatist in many, many ways, and we'll get to it. So first of all, he completely acknowledged the mutiny. So all the people yesterday were criticizing me for calling this potentially a coup and making fun of, don't believe everything you see online. Putin said it was a mutiny, it was a coup. Now, there's some people who think this is Putin playing 4D chess. He's using Prigozhin in order to get rid of his generals, and then Prigozhin and him will make up, and it'll turn out it was all Putin's plan to begin with. Okay, maybe. I'm a little dubious, if I can say so. Anyway, he called it a mutiny. He addressed the military, the Russian military, and asked them not to join Prigozhin. Don't make that fatal mistake. That's pretty weak. He stated that law enforcement received all the necessary orders, whatever that means. And he gave the impression that this is serious. This is not a game. This is not just a rogue general who doesn't have a shot. He gave the impression, oh no, I'm taking this very, very seriously. He then appealed to unity, right? He never appeals to unity, right? This is not typical of his speeches since the Ukraine war started. Usually he did, while appealing to unity, he did what he typically does and what the American right is now doing. He basically said the real existential enemy is the West. He didn't mention gays in this speech. That's very weird. He usually mentions LGBTQ at least once during a speech. He didn't mention them, but he did mention that the West was the existential enemy, and not to let this distract away. People on the right are already accusing the Biden administration of having the CIA plot this with Prigozhin, and this is really a CIA coup. Because nobody in the world can ever stand up to anybody and can ever do anything without the permission and the authority of the CIA. The CIA, I actually think it's the Mossad. I think this is really guided by the elders of Zion. I'm kidding, guys. Really, everything. There's the CIA runs the world. The incompetence of the CIA is legendary. Just watch The Ghost of Beirut. You think they pulled this off? And you think nobody has agency in the world except the CIA? It's just so pathetic. The right is so pathetic these days. It really is Looney Tunes out there. All right. So yes, the West is the existential enemy. Don't let this distract you from the West as the enemy. This is what Putin said. Putin always invokes history. He is a student of history and he cares about history. The reason they're invading Ukraine, his whole approach to governing, his own approach to Russia is an historical approach. Basically, Putin is an imperialist, a mystical imperialist. He harkens back to some mystical Russianness and reuniting the Russian people in the name of a Russian empire that is going to save the world from LGBTQ-loving Westerners. And indeed, in this speech, he again hearkened to history. And this is maybe the strongest evidence of weakness from Putin. What did he choose to hearken back to? 1917. 1917. Remember 1917, Russia was fighting a war against Germany on its Western Front. And it was the middle of World War I. And some in the Russian military abandoned that war and basically resulted in a coup to overthrow the Tsar of Russia. Putin considered himself the Tsar of Russia. But note that he's giving an example where his side lost, which I thought was really interesting. The consequence of that, he says, is the dissolution of the empire and the rise of communism. Somebody's told me about this speech. Somebody on Twitter said, "Oh no, look, Putin is against communism because he's against the 1917 revolution. Isn't that a good thing?" I'm sorry. All this stuff happening on Twitter has my opinion of the human race dramatically has declined. God. So if Putin comes out against LGBTQ and he's anti-communist, then he must be on the side of the angels, right? He must be a good guy ultimately. God. So Putin invokes 1917, which happened during World War I. He invokes the fact that this led to a major civil war, which it did, that lasted many years and was very brutal. And Ayn Rand wrote about it. If you've read We the Living, some of that, the consequence of that civil war and what happened during that civil war is evident from there. But God, so first of all, he's accepted that this could lead to a civil war. That is unbelievable, unbelievable, weakness that he's acknowledging this, that Putin is acknowledging this, right? This is, by the way, not Twitter. This is Putin's speech. God. He signaled that the events are really serious, that he is clearly afraid. He's given huge weight to Prigozhin. Prigozhin is now the equivalent of the rebels in 1917. I mean, this is very unusual for Putin. For Putin, usually his opponents are nothing. Zeros, little guys, mean nothing. He is the big shot. This is easy, no problem. We're going to take care of it. This is super weak. So Putin is really, I think, in trouble. He thinks he's in trouble anyway. He then promises protection and accuses Wagner of betrayal, excess ambition, and personal interests. That's typical Putin. But he basically is calling him Prigozhin a treasonous. So it's hard to imagine how Putin and Prigozhin then team up again later on. Not happening. I don't think happening. He then states that anti-terrorism measures are being introduced into the Moscow region and several other regions to stabilize the situation. Hard to tell what is actually going on there. Bottom line, it's quite possible that power will change in Russia. Hard to tell, but it's possible. If it happens, it's likely to be pretty brutal. A lot of people are going to die. The US, EU, NATO, and the West are not going to determine the outcome of this. This is going to be determined by Russians. Prigozhin is a real threat to Putin. Putin has given Prigozhin significant weight through his rhetoric. I think this, the speech by Putin basically says this is really happening. This is really happening. Russia's a completely insane place. At the end of the day, what we're seeing in Russia today, and this is the danger is don't assume Prigozhin's a good guy. He is not. This is one nasty character. Let's see, I had his rap sheet out here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, he was born in 1961, just a few days after me. So I'm just a few days older than him, in Leningrad. 1981, he was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment for robbery and fraud. He began selling hot dogs in 1990 after an early release from prison. He expanded his business operation in 1995, ran popular and successful restaurants. He grew closer to Putin in the 2000s, served international leaders as his catering business, became known as Putin's chef, has received government contracts and grew increasingly wealthy. In 2014, he established a Wagner group to support Russian forces in the war in Donbass, but then expanded into operations dramatically, into operations in Syria and in Africa. Indeed, the one operation in which U.S. forces fought with Russian forces in Syria, this happened, was with the Wagner group. Brutal. A lot of Russians were killed. He became so expanded dramatically into Syria and Africa. His forces control many countries in Africa. They are crucial to that. But he became a key player in the war, particularly with the campaign in Bakhmut. So this guy is a bad guy. He is a nationalist. He has talked about crushing Ukraine. My guess is if he took power, He would be more brutal of an authoritarian than Putin is. This is not a good guy. This is not some liberal savior for Russia. Russia's not going to have a liberal savior in a very long time. He is he's going to be, if to the extent that he is successful, he is a super authoritarian. He is, again, dangerous. He might be somebody who'd be more likely to use tactical nuke than even Putin. He is friendly to the nationalists. So there's no good outcome here. And let's be realistic. The one good thing that is going to come out of this is, Putin might be gone, or at least there's going to be some bloodshed, and they're going to be preoccupied with the civil war. This is really, really, really good. Really, really good for the Ukrainians. If I were the Ukrainians, I would be watching this carefully, and if I've got troops in reserve, which they do, soon, if not now, is the time to use them. Now is the time to go in there and just crush the Russian forces and sweep that territory and get rid of it. Now, it's problematic because the mines in the ground don't care about what's happening in Moscow. The mines are there no matter what. But if ever there was a time to find a place to break through, the other thing I would do is I'd intensify whatever communication I had with the Russian troops on the ground. Let the Russian troops know what's going on in Russia itself. Crush their morale. They didn't have much morale to begin with. Now's the time to completely crush them. Maybe they'll just leave if you push them a little bit. So, I mean, let the Russian troops know what's going on in the back, right? Let's see. God, so much going on. I just have to. Let me just find this. I just this tweet from Ahmari. You know Ahmari? Let's see if I can find it though. No, I need to do that. So. Sohrab Ahmari is one of the main leaders of what you'd call the the integralists, the new right, the guys that would like to turn the United States into theocracy together with Denin and Vermeule. I mean, this guy's a real piece of work, really nasty. Anyway, this is his tweet today. The Wagner uprising bears a lesson for the West. Okay. The privatization of military capacity, the rise of defense-connected CEOs and mercenaries with private tech and war-making prowess is an enormous danger to the state. To the state, it's the most extreme case of what I call private tyranny. This is his problem, right? This is his problem. It's not the nature of authoritarianism and the nature of a mafia regime in Russia. It's not the horror of engaging in immoral, unpopular war in Ukraine. It's not the evil of a mafia-like government. It's not the consequence of a regime oppressing its own people. No, it's CEOs with too much power. CEOs in the defense industry with too much power. Now, I'm against private armies. Maybe you should have written this for the anarcho-capitalists to read. But, they can't criticize Putin. They can't criticize authoritarianism. Laura Loomer, one of those beacons of light on the conspiracy theory, crazy, nutty right in the United States today, writes, I truly believe the U.S. government is working with the CIA to stage a coup in Russia to oust Putin so that Joe Biden can campaign on topping Putin in 2024. Just seems like this is all coordinated so Biden can take credit for ending the Ukraine-Russia war and pretend to be a hero. The U.S. government is the biggest terrorist organization in the world. These are the people, those of you who I guess love the right, want to support. This is it. The U.S. government is the biggest terrorist organization in the world. Yeah, I saw somebody affiliated with all of us saying something like, they're all mafia. The NATO is the mafia, Ukraine's the mafia, Russia's the mafia. Who cares? Really? Talk about moral equivalence? Awful. Yes, Biden is all powerful. I don't know if you knew this, but Biden is guiding the actions in Ukraine. I mean, the guy can barely utter a sentence that's coherent. He can barely manage what's going on in the U.S. But Biden, he's the one out there. He's doing this. He's responsible for everything going on in the world. All right, what else do we want to say? I might go to your questions. By some reports, Russia has already lost 7 airplanes and helicopters today. Again, hard to tell if that is right or what. This is the Russian army versus Prigozhin. But it does seem like they will be in Moscow very, very, very soon. All right, let's see what Prigozhin has just come out with a weird statement. Okay. I don't know if this is true, but Prigozhin says it's over. Okay, so after all that, Prigozhin says it's over. They were going to dismantle PMC Wagner. We came out on 23rd of June to the March of Justice. In a day, we walked to nearly 200 kilometers away from Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of blood. It's not clearly true. Of our fighters. We did not spill. Now the moment has come when blood may spill. That's why, understanding the responsibility for spilling Russian blood, no one on one of the sides, we are turning back our convoys and going back to field camps according to plan. So that's just been published. So go figure what the hell is going on, right? This is exactly why it's impossible. It's impossible to figure out what's going on, right? All right, there you go. Russia. Russia is a land of mafiosa, bandits, private armies, personal hatreds. Who knows what the hell they are doing or what the hell is going on? Maybe this is him buying time. Maybe this is him pretending. Maybe somebody threatened him in a way that was unequivocal. I don't know. I have no idea. Will Prigozhin really walk away? Will the accusations of treason just disappear? Are they all gonna, hug and play nice? Is this all just one big farce? Was this really all just a 4D chess move by Putin? I don't know, but again, this is the problem of trying to follow what's going on in real time, is that it's impossible. It's impossible. Let me just check another. God. All right. Yeah, breaking news means breaking. So Prigozhin accepted Lukashenko's proposal to stop the Wagner movement in Russia and take further steps to de-escalate tensions, the press service of Belarusian president reported. So this is some kind of peace offering from the Belarusian president. Something smells here. Something just doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem right. Hard to tell exactly what, but we'll see. We'll see. Is Putin still in command? Prigozhin has announced that having moved his units to within 200 kilometers of Moscow, he's turning back. Yep. All right, these people are nuts. People are nuts. This is an insane country, an insane regime, truly crazy. and it you're hearing it in real time. It truly is unfathomable what's going on there. We'll see how this develops. I'll take your questions in a minute, although, and the other aspect of this I was going to say is other people are going to try to take advantage of this. We'll see. Belarusians are thinking about rebelling against their own authoritarian government. We'll see if they take advantage of this. There was those Russian troops that were fighting on the side of Ukraine that infiltrated Russia. They are talking about taking arms and taking this opportunity and using this opportunity to do something more significant. Again, this is all up in the air. This is all, who knows what is going on in the background? Who knows what deals are being cut right now? Who knows what Prigozhin has been told or what he has said? I find it hard to believe that he just marched to Moscow and retreated. Something else is going on here. So we will see, particularly when you look and see, Russian soldiers surrendering to Wagner in the city of Ronetsk, where the oil depot was bombed. And now Prigozhin is just saying, oh, whoops, that was just a trial. That was just an exercise. And that the Russian military would let him get away with that? Unless, again, Putin has cut a deal, or Prigozhin and somebody else in Russia has cut a deal against Putin. Who knows, right? Complete nuttiness. All right, Iron Meerkat says that he's running out of popcorn watching the monkeys fight. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of the absurdity and the monkeyness of the whole thing. By the way, this show, we've got probably the largest audience we've ever had for a news roundup. This show is funded by the Super Chat. It's funded by monthly contributors. You can support the show on YaronBrookShow.com/support. You can support the show on Patreon. If you're watching live now, you can step in with the Super Chat or with the sticker and support the show. It would be great if those of you who value what I try to do on these shows, if you stepped in and just provided support. A lot of you have already. I haven't thanked everybody on the list, and I can't get to it because it's way above in my stream. But thank you to everybody who has already used the Super Chat feature to support what I do. This is how I fund these shows. So I value for value. If you're getting any value from what I'm saying, please use, and I'm an honest user, doing $1, right? $1 is great. So whatever it is that you think this is worth, or whatever it is you can afford, please support the show. Again, Super Chat down there, YaronBrookShow.com/support, and Patreon elsewhere. Okay, Tajikin from Norway. Whoops, pressed the wrong button there. Reading Atlas Shrugged for the first time and have not arrived at Galt's speech, which is incredible and second to none. What a time to read that book with everything happening in the real world. Astounding, absolutely. And if those of you have not read the book yet, read Atlas Shrugged. Read Atlas Shrugged. It is world-changing, life-changing. Ryan says, if the position of the convoy is known, then there is something more broad going on. Otherwise, they would be cannon fodder. I suspect Wagner already has assurances in place from military commanders. Support the show. Yes, I mean, that was my hypothesis. Now Prigozhin is leaving. Maybe he has assurances from military commanders. Maybe Moscow's already taken care of. Who knows what's actually going on? I don't. Twitter right now is in a frenzy. Mainstream media doesn't even have this story on yet. And some people have already seen the Prigozhin announcements. Some people have not. So completely impossible to tell what exactly is going on. So it's hard to tell if the audio is real, if it's fake, if again, he's cut a deal. We'll see. Yes, but I think it's cannon fodder too. But I've said, why aren't the pilots in the air? And my guess is the pilots are not in the air because they don't want to shoot at other Russians. And there are also, by the way, civilian cars on the highway. They don't want to shoot at their own Russians. Thomas says, and I thought I knew all the Wagner epics. A new Wagner epic. This could have been the right to the Valkyrs, that marching into Moscow with the right of the Valkyrs in the background, just like in Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now. Can we depend on the Biden administration? Can we depend on the Biden administration, the contact, the parties involved, and the generals in charge of the nuclear arsenal to protect the security of the nuclear weapons that Russia has? I don't see why not. The people who would do the contacting are probably our generals. I'm sure they've been on the phone since yesterday. It's the CIA. It's the station chief in Moscow. Do you think they're less reliable to do that than under Trump? I think more reliable than under Trump. Less reliable than under Obama or Bush or anybody else? No, I don't think there's any reason to worry about the incompetence of the Biden administration in this context. Jacob said, thanks, Yaron. If you could later tweet the voices you're listening to, I'd appreciate it. I'll try. I'm retweeting some of it, so if you follow my tweet, you'll see some of the retweets. Alex says, when the USSR collapsed, do you think the U.S. had a chance for a successful foreign policy and form a true alliance with parts of Russia? Is this even doable in the future? All geopolitical games doomed to fail? I mean, this is the big question, and this is probably the most important question. And here, I want to echo Ayn Rand's view of Russia. Rand viewed Russia as a mystical, collectivistic culture that was going to be almost impossible to redeem. That the culture was fundamentally an anti-reason, anti-individualism culture that you had really no hope for. So it's not clear what could have been done. It's not clear that without a real cultural change, a real ideological change, a real westernization, and I know some of you are horrified by this, but without a westernization of Russian culture, is any better option possible to Russia? I think Russia has to be westernized. I don't want it to be done by force, but it has to be westernized. And until it's westernized, this is what you're going to get. Thugs fighting with one another, not in the name of communism, in the name of loot, in the name of thuggery, in the name of Russian nationalism, in the name of the mystical gods of ancient Russia, in the name of the Russian, Orthodox Church. So Russia as a culture, and Russia has a culture, and many of the minorities are part of that culture, is a mystical, collectivistic culture. And that culture, again, needs to be westernized. Otherwise, there's no hope. Could some of that have happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall or after the fall of the Soviet Union? Yes. If Russia had gotten the right advice, imagine an America that said, yes, communism failed because communism had to fail. Not because of Ronald Reagan, but because it had to fail, because it's a losing ideology. It's an immoral ideology. Imagine somebody saying it's an immoral ideology. And if Russia wants to change, if Russia wants to be better, what it needs to be is capitalist. And here are the principles of capitalism. And instead of sending, Jeffrey Sachs to Russia to advise them and to create the mafia state that exists today, by, privatizing, Russian enterprises without establishing the rule of law and without establishing private property rights. Everything was done upside down. If it had been done right, then Russia would have had a chance. I mean, there are many, many good people in Russia. There have been many, many good people. Many of them have left. Hundreds of thousands of them have left. But there was a chance to move Russia in the direction of the West if the West had balls, if the West had self-esteem, if the West could project. Instead, what we got was the ridiculous end of history. Mixed economy, democratic liberalism, socialism, that's the end of history. The mixed economy is the end of history, according to Fukuyama. That's what we got. If they had said, what we really need is capitalism, and Russia needs to become capitalist, and hey, the West needs to be capitalist, then yes. But given the state of the West in 1991, what happened, I think, to the USSR was almost inevitable. It's never completely inevitable because there's always free war, but almost inevitable. All right. Thank you to all the super chatters. And I know I'm getting a lot of stickers. I really, really appreciate it. David, Peja, Jacob, David, Motor Vibes, Jupiter, Anonymous User, Mike, Adam, Jonathan, Honing. Thank you, Jonathan. Theme Master, Wes, Daniel, and Remo. Thank you to all of you guys. Really, really appreciate this. And of course, we're going through all the people who've done it with questions. You too can support the show. Keep this show going. We do a daily news roundup every single day during the week. Sometimes we do these specials of breaking news. I wouldn't be surprised if I do one of these tomorrow, given how things are changing so fast. But if you'd like to see me continue doing this, if you think this is of value, then show value for value and contribute something using the super chat, the sticker, or go to my website, yaronbrookshow.com/support, and make a monthly contribution. Okay, anonymous user says, second most powerful military, always a delusion. Yes, I've talked a lot about that. And by the way, you know, Twitter's been super useful in terms of actually getting information. The reality is that the first indication that Russia was losing, was not going to be able to achieve its goals in Ukraine, was not going to be able to take Kiev, was really some of the images coming out on Twitter of what was going on with the Russian military, where they were bogged down in the airfield outside of Kiev, or where there was burnt out T-72s, any of those things. It was really interesting to watch. And Twitter has, as a consequence, if you know how to use it and if you follow the right accounts and you don't take anything too seriously, but you try to back everything up, is now the source for breaking news, and much better than anything in the mainstream media. The mainstream media is always a few days behind what you can get on Twitter, particularly for things like this. All right, let's see. Yeah. Michael says, Putin, it's not a war, it's a special operation. Well, it's not a coup, it's a special leadership review. Who knows what it is now with the latest news coming out of here? Who knows what it is? It's almost impossible to tell what the hell is going on. Right? I mean, he said there was no blood spilled, but they've also said they've knocked down a number of Russian helicopters. So clearly, blood has been spilled. One of the things about Twitter is they don't actually list the stuff based on how recent it is. So it's hard to keep track of it. All right. There's video of an execution of one of the Wagner guys who supposedly tried to kill Prigozhin. So who knows? Again, all bad guys, all mafiosa. This is the nature of the Russian regime. This is the nature of the Russian regime that so many people on the right think is fighting for Western civilization. Jordan Peterson, right? Putin is the West. Putin's the real West. Hopper Campbell, Putin looks like he's on the verge of crying. This is the beginning of the end for Russia. Perhaps more Western market reforms in Russia's future. I doubt it, unfortunately. I don't know that this is the end of Russia. There always is the possibility that if this does descend into some kind of civil war, that some of the ethnic groups will rise up against. But that is a possibility. But it's certainly not the end of authoritarianism in Russia. Authoritarianism in Russia is going to outlast Putin and Prigozhin by a long shot. Unfortunately, I don't see more freedom in Russia's future because of this. When do you think people will start to look at the wars in Africa, Middle East, or Asia and actually have any care for those outcomes? How does the media select which countries matter globally? Well, a big part of it is You live in a Western, we all live in a Western country. The West, in that sense, is therefore, because it's close to us, it's part of our culture, more important to us. Ukraine was moving to becoming a Western country. And in that sense, it was important. Europe is important because it's so close to kind of the culture and the world that we care about. Africa is far away. The Middle East is close, but just such a disaster, nobody knows how to keep track of it, so they just ignore it. And in Asia, there are no wars going on, as far as I can tell, in Asia right now. I'm scanning quickly Asia. It's certainly not in East Asia. All right, anonymous user, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. Absolutely. Ryan, no matter what, these developments are a boon to Ukraine morale. I think so, and I think a boon to Ukraine ability on the battlefield as well. The more uncertainty you can create within Russia, the more you will find that morale will decline among the troops, and the easier the battle will be for the Ukrainians. All right, there we go. That's what I wanted. Let me just check in with one of the channels I follow. Okay, Danny says, there is a fair chance that the rebellious forces in Russia and the countries under Russian power will seize their opportunity. How big is the risk for China moves in to secure energy reserves? I think it's fairly modest at this point. Maybe if this grows and becomes bigger, we'll see. But no, I don't think China's moving. I think China's afraid of nuclear war with Russia, and it has no incentive to do so. Not unless the situation really goes to all-out civil war, and they think that there's real weakness there. Yeah. It looks like Prigozhin is serious, and they're turning back. So I'm sure a lot of Russians are unhappy about this. By the way, the one military force that seems to have come to Russia's defense against Prigozhin were the Chechens under the command of Kadyrov. So Kadyrov is a huge Putin ally. Kadyrov is in Ukraine fighting for the Russians. Hard to believe that Chechnya is going to do anything. But anyway, right now everything's up in the air because we don't actually know what's going on, given the latest from Prigozhin. So this might be all over by this evening, but it's hard to say what that means. James says the Russian government would be wise to hand Putin over and stand down, or do his underlings still fear him? Again, hard to tell. I think everybody fears the FSB, the equivalent of the KGB, and who knows what side they're on and what they're doing, and maybe and how they got to Prigozhin, or who knows who they got to. So something is going on behind the scenes that we don't know. Daniel says, break-in Belarusian president held talks with Prigozhin today. The Wagner chief agreed to hold off on further advances at the moment. Yeah, I mean, really? What does that even mean? But it looks like he is the one who got Prigozhin to stand down and say that he's actually reversing course. But what's the deal there? What's happening? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Liam says, will Putin fall, ultimately destroy Trump and the nationalist right? No. I mean, I don't think anything is they'll just pivot. But the national right is here to stay, unfortunately. It's not going to go away easily. Not going to go away easily at all. And Putin, by the way, there's no reason to believe yet that Putin is falling. Stephen 13 says, if Russia was still communist, would there still be as much aid going to Ukraine? Remember, the West is now far left. Yes, there'd be even more. There'd be just as much aid going to the West. The West is not communist. How do people benefit from this scenario around the world? I see no upside in this scenario. However, as a capitalist, how do you view the situation? My view is whenever the bad guys are fighting among each other, it distracts them from creating havoc for us. So the fact that Russians are fighting each other is good for the West. It distracts them. It's good for Ukraine. It distracts them from fighting the Ukrainians. Again, I think the Ukraine should make a big push right now, in the next day or so. You always want the bad guys to kill each other. It saves you the trouble. So I absolutely think that, if there was a civil war right now, and if there was an upheaval in China, that would be good for the West. It doesn't mean the West should get involved. It shouldn't. It should sit back and watch and hope that, they kill each other and that ultimately something good results of it, comes out of it. But even if something bad comes out of it, it's a weaker bad. I mean, Putin's won here. But what's clear is that Putin is weak. So if Prigozhin actually withdraws his troops, well, he's got this lever now. He can always redeploy them. And Putin is weak. Putin is not beholden to him. Lukashenko from Belarus has negotiated this peace under some what's the deal behind there? Russia is weaker today than it was yesterday. Significantly weaker. Putin is significantly weaker today than he was before. The Russian military is weaker. Many of them joined the Wagner group. The whole edifice of authoritarianism in Russia is weaker. It doesn't mean it's gone. It doesn't mean it would disappear. It doesn't mean they're going to capitulate in Ukraine or withdraw their troops. It just means they're weaker. And anytime the bad guys are weaker, the good guys should be happy. Stephen 13, I know that if I created a Western empire, you would oppose me. But if I invaded Russia, would you support me? No. I don't believe the United States should. I mean, if you, Stephen 13, invaded Russia, that might be fun to watch. I have no idea what Stephen 13's story is. He says, I'm a moderate right-wing nationalist, and I'm tired of people thinking that we support Putin. But many of you do. Many of you do. You support Orban, who supports Putin, and you support, the authoritarian. You support authoritarians. That's what right-wing nationalism means. So don't run away from what the implications are of your ideology. Okay, that's all the questions. Anything really stunning happening? I mean, how could he be more stunning than the news in the last half an hour? I mean, it's just... the question is what will really happen. Is he going to withdraw from Moscow? Is he going to stay on the edge of Moscow? A lot of people within Wagner are really upset right now. So supposedly on Telegram, Wagner Group senior people are expressing their frustration with Prigozhin's decision to halt. Hard to tell where this leads. Let's go again and see if there's anything breaking, and then we'll call it a day. All right. Okay, breaking is reports there will be major changes in Russian military Ministry of Defense leadership in exchange for Wagner halting its advance on Moscow. So Wagner stops and they sack the Minister of Defense who Prigozhin has been accusing of all things, and Putin remains president. Is Putin stronger now or weaker now? Clearly Putin is weaker. Much weaker. Much weaker. If this is actually the deal that's been cut, and it makes sense that this would be the deal they cut, Putin is still in power, and Putin is much weaker. All right, before I go, please give the show a thumbs up. Please like the show, at least if you saw any value in it. I'm not asking for money, just a press of a button with the thumb up, because it helps all over the algorithm. It helps the show get promoted. It helps our visibility. I need to go now because I have another show at 3 o'clock. I hope some of you would join us. If there are any breaking news in the next hour, I will cover that in the show at 3 o'clock. But some of you will be joining me live on video for a Q&A. Others will be on Super Chat for the Q&A. We will have a Ask Me Anything. But of course, to the extent that there's more stuff happening, and I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, very quickly here. I'm sure there is, because stuff is happening very, then we will cover it. So join me at 3 p.m. East Coast time. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, if you're listening to this not live, if you're not here right now, or you couldn't use the super chat, or you didn't want to use the super chat, you can, and I think ultimately should, support the show on a monthly basis by going to yaronbrookshow.com/support, or on Patreon. Just search Yaron Brook Show on Patreon and become a regular monthly, join the hundreds of people who are already supporters of the show. Bye, everybody. I will see you all in 55 minutes.